It was an ordinary day as I dove into fixing my old retro car. My workshop, a small space behind the house, is where I spend my time disassembling parts, tightening bolts, and escaping from everything else. Sometimes it feels like my own world, where it's just me and the car. I've gotten used to solitude and silence, but something changed that day. The door to the workshop creaked, and I turned around, expecting to see my stepfather Greg, who often dropped by to check on what I was doing. But instead, standing in the doorway was Sophie. I froze when I looked up. Her presence here was unexpected. She rarely entered my space, preferring to spend her time in the living room or the garden. Her appearance in the workshop seemed out of place, yet at the same time strangely magnetic. Sophie was wearing a light dress that accentuated her figure, and her hair was neatly done as always. However, there was something different in her gaze, something elusive. Her green eyes sparkled with something I couldn't quite grasp. I quickly turned back to the car, trying to distract myself from the unwelcome thoughts that suddenly started to form in my mind. "You spend a lot of time here," she said softly, but with an underlying tone. I just nodded, trying not to show how much her presence was throwing me off. "The car needs attention," I replied, hoping the conversation would end there. But Sophie stepped forward, slowly and confidently, her heels clicking against the concrete floor of the workshop, each step echoing in my mind. "I rarely come in here," she continued, stopping beside me, "but I decided to see what you've been up to." Her words were simple, but the feeling that there was something more behind them grew with every second. She stood next to me, and I could feel the air around us start to thicken. Her smile was as warm as ever, but this time it seemed more personal, almost intimate. Sophie leaned against the workbench, and this small action only heightened the tension inside me. She was so close that I could catch the scent of her perfume, fresh with a hint of citrus. "You deserve a break." Her voice was gentle, but I noticed a slight note of command in it. I tried to hide my discomfort and replied with a nervous chuckle, "There's nothing to see here but tools and dirt." "That's what you think." Her smile became even more mysterious. I didn't know how to react. Every gesture, every look of hers made me feel out of place. It felt as if the workshop, my refuge, was becoming smaller with every second of her presence. For the rest of the day, I tried to forget that strange moment in the workshop, but thoughts of Sophie kept haunting me. I knew what had happened between us was just a play of words and glances, but why had it lodged so deeply in my mind? Her voice, her subtle hint at something more. And most importantly, I couldn't figure out what lay behind it. The next morning, I found myself back in the workshop. The silence around helped calm my thoughts, but only for a short time. Soon I heard the familiar sound of footsteps at the door. Sophie had come again. This time I wasn't as surprised by her arrival, but I still felt a slight tension. "Hey, Michael," her voice was more casual than yesterday. She didn't pretend to be there by chance. "You look so focused today." I tried not to look at her for too long, not to reveal my confusion, but her presence was impossible to ignore. This time she sat on an old chair by the wall watching me. I could feel her gaze on me, and it made me nervous. "Sophie, why do you keep coming here?" I asked, unable to hold back. The question was sharp, but I needed to understand what she wanted. She smiled, raising an eyebrow as if she had been expecting that question. "I just want to get to know you better, Michael. You've been living here for months, but we've hardly talked." Her answer was simple, but there was something in it that made me question her intentions. I nodded, continuing to tinker with the car, trying to ignore her presence. But every time I met her gaze, I felt something changing. She got up from the chair and walked closer, her steps barely audible on the concrete floor. "You do realize I'm not just here by chance?" Her voice dropped to a near whisper, but there was something new, something more serious in it. I froze, turning away from the car to look at her. She stood so close now, her eyes level with mine, her face too close. My heart raced and I didn't know how to react. Everything happened quickly. Her hands rested on my shoulders, she leaned in, and I felt the soft touch of her lips. The kiss was brief, almost fleeting, but I couldn't help but feel the warmth it brought. Everything inside me screamed that this was wrong, that I should stop it, but I didn't pull away. We looked at each other in silence, and it felt as if time itself had stopped around us.
"We can't," I whispered, stepping back, but her gaze said something different. "You're right," she said softly, but there was something dangerous flashing in her eyes. "But maybe it's not about what we can or can't do." A few days had passed since Sophie and I had our encounter in the workshop. We hadn't spoken about the kiss again, but its echo continued to resonate in my mind. Every time I saw her, my heart raced and my thoughts grew tangled. I understood that something more than just friendship had developed between us, and this situation demanded resolution. That day, I decided I needed to talk to her. Inside me, the feeling grew that this was the only way to sort out my feelings. Sophie came to the workshop again, and as always, her presence filled the space with a special atmosphere. "Hi, Michael," she greeted me with her usual dazzling smile. "How's it going?" "Hey," I tried to sound casual. "Not bad. I've been working on that project you saw." Sophie stepped closer, her eyes studying my movements as if she was searching for a sign that I wanted to discuss our recent encounter. I gathered my thoughts and finally decided to speak up. "Sophie, we need to talk about what happened," I said, trying to keep calm. I saw her expression change slightly, but she nodded, understanding that the conversation was inevitable. "Okay," she said, biting her lips slightly. "I've been thinking about it too." I took a step back, giving her space to sit on the old chair. My thoughts were scattered, and I didn't know where to start. But when I saw her serious expression, I knew I couldn't stall any longer. "I don't want this to ruin our friendship," I said, leaning forward. "But I feel like there's something between us, and it's confusing me." Sophie remained silent, her eyes sparkling in the light of the lamp. I was nervous because I didn't know how she would react, but finally, she spoke. "I feel it too, Michael. But it's complicated. We have other circumstances that we can't ignore." "I understand," I replied. Though emotions were boiling inside me, I didn't want her to leave, but I could feel that the fragile thread of our friendship could snap at any moment. She stood up and came closer to me, as if trying to bridge the distance between us. In her eyes, there was a spark that made me believe she wanted this just as much as I did. "Maybe we should take a break from all of this," she suggested, and I saw her lips twitch into a smile. "A break?" I asked, feeling a wave of hope rise in my chest. "You mean step away from it all?" Sophie nodded, and I couldn't resist. I leaned in again, and this time, the kiss was more confident, deeper. Her lips responded to my impulse, as if they had been seeking this moment just as much as I had. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a connection, sincere and full of passion. We pulled away from each other, and although there was still space between us, its density felt almost tangible. Sophie looked at me with a smile, and I realized that despite all the difficulties, this moment was worth the risk. The events of the last kiss seemed to fill my life with new shades. We could no longer ignore the connection between us, and every moment with Sophie became special to me. In the evenings, we would work together in the workshop, laughing and sharing dreams. But at the same time, I could feel a storm brewing on the horizon. That day when I arrived at work, the atmosphere was tense. Sophie didn't show up, and her absence made me anxious. I kept checking the time, hoping she would appear. As the sun began to set, I decided to call her. "Hello, Sophie," I said, not hiding my concern. "Hey, Michael." Her voice was quiet and tired. "Sorry I couldn't come today. I'm having a rough day." Immediately, I felt a tightening in my chest. "Is everything all right? Are you safe?" "Yeah, I'm fine. Just having some issues with my parents. They don't understand what I'm doing, and I feel overwhelmed. I understood that this situation required my involvement. Listen, I can come over. We can talk about it. No need, she replied. I just need some time alone. I'll call you later. After the call, I stayed in the workshop, sorting through my thoughts. I wanted to help her, but it felt like words weren't enough. My feelings for Sophie were growing stronger, and I wanted to be there for her during this tough time. That evening, not waiting for her call, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I drove to her house. As I approached the door, my heart was pounding. I didn't know how she would react, but I felt it was the right thing to do. I knocked, and after a few moments, the door opened. Sophie looked tired, with a drawn face and red eyes.
Michael, she didn't expect to see me. What are you doing here? I was worried about you, I said as I stepped inside. We need to talk. She nodded, leading me to her room. Inside, there was silence, with only the occasional noise from the street outside reminding us of the world beyond. Sophie sat on the bed, and I took a seat beside her. I just don't know how to explain it, she began. My parents don't understand why I'm so passionate about my art. They think it's a waste of time. They're wrong, I replied, truly believing in her talent. You're amazing and you should follow your dreams. Her eyes filled with tears, and I reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. In that moment, she leaned towards me, and I wrapped my arms around her. It was necessary. She needed support, and I wanted to be the one to help her through these difficult times. Thank you for coming, she said as she pulled away. There was something in her eyes, and before I could fully grasp what was happening, she leaned in and kissed me. This kiss was full of emotion, tenderness, and hope. We both realized that the challenges she was facing only strengthened our connection. I felt that despite all the obstacles, we would be able to overcome anything together. The next day, after our emotional encounter, I woke up with hope in my heart. I understood that despite all the difficulties, our bond had become stronger. There was a sense of anticipation for something new in the air. We decided that we wouldn't hide from the problems, but face them together. We met at our favorite cafe, where we started every morning with a cup of aromatic coffee. Sophie looked more confident, her eyes sparkling as she talked about her plans. I listened with excitement as she shared her ideas for an art exhibit that could be the first step in her career as an artist. I want people to see that my work matters, she said, gripping her cup. This isn't just a hobby. It's my life. I nodded, feeling inspired by her passion. You need to do this exhibit, Sophie. You deserve to have your art seen. We started discussing the details, the venue, the timing, and the concept. In that moment, I realized just how much she had poured into her work and how important it was to support her on this path. Every brushstroke and every drop of paint reflected her soul. After we finished discussing her plans, we decided to take a walk through the park. Around us, life was bustling. Children laughing, dogs playing, and couples holding hands, enjoying each moment together. We found a quiet spot on a bench, and I felt a wave of anticipation wash over me. You know, I've been thinking about us, I said, trying to catch her gaze. We can overcome anything if we're together. Sophie smiled, and that smile filled me with warmth. I believe that too, Michael. I don't want to lose you. It was as if magic surrounded us. I leaned in slowly, and in that moment, when our lips met, the whole world disappeared. This kiss was full of promises of support, hope, and a future. We knew that together we could face any challenge. When we pulled away, I saw Sophie glowing with happiness. You give me strength, she admitted, and her voice was full of sincerity. And you inspire me, I replied. You make me better just by being with me. We continued walking through the park, discussing our dreams and plans. Every step, every word brought us closer to our goals. Thoughts of her exhibit swirled in my mind, and I was determined to help her achieve it. That evening, as we parted ways, I felt like it was only the beginning. Sophie was no longer afraid of her ambitions, and I was ready to stand by her side, supporting and inspiring her. "Tomorrow," she said, "let's start preparing for the exhibit together." "Definitely," I replied, and in that moment, everything in our lives seemed possible. I looked into her eyes and knew that we had many challenges ahead, but with Sophie by my side, I was ready for anything. We both understood, together we could create something incredible.